So we'll get started. So what I'll be running through with you today is what are the Sustainable Development Goals? Why do they matter? So we're going to explore the 17 goals and how they connect with your life and the world all around you. So, as I said, my name is Maya. I work with ECO-UNESCO as an environmental youth officer, and I work on the workshops team where I go around across the country delivering workshops on topics like the SDGs or climate justice, fast fashion, and the SDGs will look at how all these different issues kind of connect in. So to start, we'll be looking a little bit at our role in shaping a sustainable world. So these are kind of our learning outcomes. So by the end of this, we'll be hopefully understanding what does sustainable mean, what does sustainable development mean, but also knowing how we can bring them into our everyday lives. So that could be as individuals in your community, your country. And yeah, we'll be exploring this a little bit more. But to start off, I suppose is maybe like to warm us up a little bit. I want to ask you to think a bit about the big problems. So in this scenario, you are the president, and this is quite, I suppose, relevant considering we're coming up to the presidential elections. But in order to think about how we might be able to address many of the problems in our world, we need to think about what actually are those problems before we can actually think about solving them. So, in terms of what are these problems, what do you see in your community, maybe across Ireland, your school, your youth group? That's the question I'm asking. So, I'd like you to think as if you were the president and you're not just looking at, the things that affect you, maybe like for me, oh my God, I've got way too many emails, or maybe you've got loads of homework to do, but actually what's kind of at play in your wider kind of community. Um, so I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes to chat with maybe the person with you or reflect by yourself if you're by yourself. And if you would then share some of those ideas into the chat box. So start away there, have a chat, have a think, and then pop them into the chat box there. You've got 2 minutes.
I can see people are typing.
Yeah, I'm going to give
Yeah.
you guys a few seconds. So we have global warming, pollution, economical crisis, war, fast fashion, and attitudes. Yeah, that's a load of really, really relevant ones. Excellent job. Discrimination and inclusion. Yeah, those two are also really big issues in our daily lives and just across the world at the moment. Poverty and homelessness, war and discrimination. Yeah. And poverty is one we'll look a little bit at when we look at Ireland's role in the Sustainable Development Goals. And then poverty again, unequal education, and environmental issues like climate change. Yeah, they're all on the nose. Those are all really, really big issues. You're dead right. Um, Poverty and homelessness, especially, I think, in the Irish context, is one that we talk about quite a lot at the moment. But it's something that happens across the world as well. So what we'll be doing now is I'd like to see what you guys think sustainable development means. So we've named some issues. Um, and if we were going to address those in kind of the way that we're trying to do in our world at the moment is through a sustainable development model. And that sounds, that there's two big words there and not necessarily obvious what it means from the outset of like just reading that term. So what I'm asking you to do now is have a think about what do you think that means? What does that mean in terms of addressing the issues, or just what is your understanding of it? And I can see people are typing, so I'll let you type. So I'll give people another couple of seconds, and then we'll move on. Okay, so we have processes that do not negatively impact the environment and things we can do development without impacting future generations. Yeah, that's an excellent answer. And you cover a number of the different language, I suppose, terms that we use when we talk about sustainable development. So I'll go on to my next one there. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So what it means is while we advance our society to try and make things better for the future, we're also doing things like protecting the environment, being fair in the way that we treat other people, ensuring that the earth will still be healthy and its resources still plentiful for future generations, as well as ensuring a healthy life for us in the present, as well as in the future. And so there's two kind of important things in this. One is the fact that it talks about people today and that the people that don't yet exist. And that's really important in sustainable development is thinking about the present as well as the future. Second is around the word needs. So if you look around the room you're in right now, what are the needs, the must-haves that you need in order to survive? So, for example, for me, now you can't see where I am because of my screen, but for me, I need to have a building in order to work from, or shelter, a roof over my head. So it's housing, that's where that comes in. We need to have clean air in order to breathe, which links in with our climate and the goals of like life on land and biodiversity. I need electricity in order to do this call online. So I'm thinking about our energy sources and where that comes from. And so that kind of sustainable development is all of that and then more. It's thinking about all those different needs that people have. And so when we talk about the word sustainable development, it's a really big topic. You may have come across this in schools or youth groups or your workplace. Um, But what does it actually mean? So sustainable means being able to carry on this way for a period of time without negative effects or failing to reach goals. And then development is around growth and change, improving, achieving progress, moving to the next stage. However, development doesn't always mean bigger and better. And so when we talk about development and you see it on, the news and things like this, it's often about, trying to grow our GDP and get more money and like get bigger and better. But in some sustainable development theories, they talk about degrowth, which means reevaluating what it means to grow. So maybe not growing, do we actually need to grow that much in order for people to be happy and healthy? And maybe we need to scale back some of the things that we are growing or trying to develop in order to be more sustainable. So that could be looking at things like, car production, and maybe looking more into public transport. Um, and so the Sustainable Development Goals, you might also hear them referred to as the Global Goals, were adopted by the United Nations in 2015 as a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that by 2030, everyone could enjoy peace and prosperity. So they touch on a number of different areas, and each of them have targets. There's 169 targets to each of the goals, and each country around the world who has signed up to this is responsible in figuring out how we can achieve those goals before 2030. So here's just a little bit more about, I suppose, what they mean. It means they try to achieve a unified direction. So giving governments and businesses and schools and groups a bit of direction in order how to try and develop. People and planet balance. So linking human well-being with natural resources and the climate. Fairness. So trying to address inequalities, and global cooperation, so encouraging countries and organizations to work together as partners. So instead of one country going off and doing their own thing, it's recognizing that we need to work collaboratively across the world in order to address these big challenges in our lives. So they offer that kind of roadmap for change, and giving people a bit of a structure. And it works for, on a global level, the big countries and the governments, but it also can apply to our own daily lives, which is why they're so useful. They're quite applicable to many different things. And while sustainable development feels, I think, sometimes as like a new phrase, it's actually been around for quite a long time. So in, I think, the 1980s, I think I want to say 1986 or 1987, is when it was first used in reporting. And then a few years later, in 1992, at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, more than 178 countries adopted the Agenda 21, which is a plan of action to build a global partnership for sustainable development. So 1987 is when it came about. And then 8 years later, this kind of became where the starting block for the Sustainable Development Goals. So the member states adopted the Millennium Declaration, and that created the Millennium Development Goals. And there was only 8 of these, and their aim was to reduce poverty by 2015. And the difference between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals was that these first ones were focused mostly only on the global south. So that's, if you look at your map, that's south of the equator. So that's looking at Asia, Africa, South America, regions like that, who were more vulnerable to some of the big challenges that we were talking about. And then after 2015, and they were successful in some ways. They got people thinking about it. They did a lot of work in, I suppose, addressing HIV and AIDS and like global kind of illness and disease. But there was still a long way to go. And so at the Rio Plus 20 conference, there was this paper developed called The Future We Want. And that is where the Sustainable Development Goals came from. And so this was developed by a range of different countries. Ireland actually had a really big role in developing the Sustainable Development Goals. And the agenda that they come under in like UN language is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And that's where where these goals came from. So when we look at these different goals, they were created and fleshed out by a variety of countries that decided, okay, here's where we need to be. Here's what we need to try and aim for. So there's a load of different goals. There's 17 of them. What I'd like you to do is think about, what do you think is the most important goal for you and your community? So, for example, for me, I suppose the one that I connect with most is around education or reduced inequalities. I like them both. But I suppose I'm working in ECO-UNESCO, and my role is enhancing access to education on things like climate change and sustainability. And you can see the role that that has in helping people get involved and take action. And we need that. We need action. I also connect with reduced inequalities because I want to see everyone have equitable access to the resources that they need. So, for example, when I was growing up, I didn't have access to public transport. And that might sound a bit strange to some of you, but we didn't have a bus where I was. So it really meant that I didn't have as many opportunities to, I suppose, socialize with other young people other than the few people in my local area. Um, but that's something that everyone should have access to. So yeah, have a think there now for about 2, 3 minutes. Um, Maybe talk to whoever's next to you, reflect to yourself, and let me know, what goal do you connect the most with? What do you think is most important, and why? Why do you feel that this goal is super important? So yeah, have a little think there for a little bit, and then pop it into the chat when you're ready.
I might start the discussion.
Go for it. Go on.
It's funny because like I think you lean towards a goal that like you might have had like something to do with in the past, or like maybe through your upbringing and stuff like that. So I'd probably be like 15. So life on land. So before my job here, I used to work with some animals and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's through my education and stuff like that. That's where my interest would have lied. But then like how you talk about reducing inequalities, um, I grew up in Dublin, so we had access to a lot more transport, and it was easier to get around than what would have you have been like when you were younger. So it is funny how you sort of like steer towards one depending on where you might have grown up
Mm,
or what your upbringing was.
yeah, no, definitely, definitely. And I think, so what got me involved in this kind of stuff was a discussion around the Sustainable Development Goals in my school.
Mm,
And we did a film, and we looked at, what did we look at? We looked at good health and well-being, and we looked at mental health.
mm,
And then we ended up looking into discrimination and racism. So we were dipping into a few of the other goals like reduced inequalities, gender equality, um, a variety of them. And then it just got us talking about it and kind of gave us a bit of a language, which I found really useful. Yeah, I think you connect with some more than others because of just
yeah,
where you've gone in life.
life experiences, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, it depends what you've been exposed to, I guess, as well.
definitely. And I think some of them are a little bit more, you don't necessarily know exactly what they are by reading them. So like
Hmm.
sustainable cities, it is sustainable cities and communities, or some responsible consumption or infrastructure.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you don't know what that actually means until you look into them a bit more. Yeah. Oh, I can see some people typing there. I'll give you another minute or so. And then we'll move on. Sorry. I need some sort of like, I'm not gonna start singing, but I need
Background music.
yeah, little elevator jingle. But no doubt it is noisy in some of the classrooms that are calling in. So this is probably easier. So Colin says we believe that number one is most important, no poverty across the globe. Pretty big one. And it's up number one. So it was high up in their agenda when they were developing the goals. And number one is one that actually, when I go and do workshops and stuff, number one is one that comes up repeatedly as one that's really high priority. And so the Sustainable Development Goals, thinking about, the goal that maybe you connect with the most, the way it's kind of, you can see the way they've lined out that each one is given a number, but in reality, one is not more important than the other to the overall cause and aims. One can be more important to yourselves. And it's good because focusing on one and looking at just one of these goals will have a knock-on effect to the other goals. And so the Sustainable Development Goals, they're all connected, and they recognize that action in one area will affect the outcomes in the other. And that is a balance, and it's intersectional, which is really important. And that's an important word when we talk about these issues, is intersectionality. So a good way to maybe visualize it sometimes, when we talk about sustainability and the goals, is that sustainability is maybe the umbrella or the roof of a house, and propping up that roof. I know our instinctiveness is that there would be four because a cube, but there's actually three, and that is environmental, social, and economic. And all of these goals fall into one or more of these categories. So, if we look at, let's say, environmental, this could be climate action falls under there, life below water, life on land, quite a few of them. Same with social. We look at social, so that could be things like no poverty, gender equality, reduced inequalities. We look at economic, and then that looks at responsible consumption, infrastructure, energy. So that's goals 7, 9, 11. But there's ones that fit into more than just the one as well. So, for example, like 6, clean water and sanitation, that's good health and well-being and social, but that also comes under the environmental pillar as well. So it's really important, like, to see things as they're not just standalone. They kind of work together. And one of the goals that very rarely comes up as like someone's like favorite goal or most important goal is goal 17, which is partnership for the goals. And this is kind of seen as like the one that encapsulates everything. And that talks about how important it is that we work together to achieve these goals. And that includes things like accountability for governments and transparency. So when they're reporting on the goals, are they being honest? Are they providing funding to groups to achieve these goals? For the richer countries, are they trying to support the countries that might not have as many resources to have sustainable development? Are we ensuring that we're leaving nobody behind? And so that partnership is really, really important. But we're coming up to 2030, which is considered the end of the goals. And that kind of ties in. So when they were developing them, they were thinking about carbon emissions. And if we are to achieve and not go over 1.5 degrees Celsius, we need to address these key global issues by 2030. So that means in order to reduce those carbon emissions, we need to really address these issues. So they gave the goal of 2030. But what's going to happen when we reach 2030 and maybe we haven't achieved all these goals? So there's a few different, decisions. It's not super clear what's going to happen yet. There's discussions around having some sort of like sustainability transition goals. So that's around like the tech kind of side of things. We look at the rise of AI and digital media and the impact that these things like data centers and AI have on our access to water, for example. Are we going to go down that kind of route? Or are we going to just update the goals and kind of take into account how some countries did better in some goals? So maybe they'll have different goals. Or will there be completely new goals? This, I think, is probably unlikely because it requires a lot of work. And I'm not sure that there is the time to develop a whole new set of goals unless they started maybe like 10 years ago. I'm not too sure. One of the important things to remember, and sometimes I've been given out and been told that this is a little cheesy, but I think it's really important to say and to recognize, is that we're talking about some really big issues, and some of them are kind of scary. I found some of them really scary when I was younger. But what's really important to remember is that for young people, you were born into this system. And this system, which we're in, and the issues we're experiencing, that started years before you were born. It's not your fault that things are the way that they are right now. You were born into this system. But you do have a really important role in trying to achieve or like change the system and make it become better. Young people have a really important role in that. And one of the roles is learning how we can keep people accountable. You, as an individual, might not have been the reason that this happened, but you have a role in targeting and like challenging those who have a big impact, like governments and industries. So it's important to remember to not be too hard on yourself, because it's not your fault that we are in the situation we are. But it's important to remember, I suppose, the opportunity that you have to try and change a lot of these issues. So one of the things we're going to look at here is, how is Ireland doing? And if you look at this image here, so this is from the UN Sustainable Development Goal Index, where you can measure and see how well other countries and ourselves are doing with our goals and targets. Currently, we're sitting at around 70% in some of our categories, with only one in the green category, and that is no poverty. Now, this doesn't mean that poverty doesn't exist, but that in terms of our goals, we're doing well. And some of those sub goals of the goal, the targets, would be making sure people live above the poverty line, or we're maintaining poverty, we're not becoming poorer drastically, or hoping to achieve these targets. It looks likely we might achieve them. Now, as I'm sure everyone is well aware, we have serious issues regarding poverty in Ireland on the ground. So, do we think this is accurate? Is a question that a lot of people are asking. Is, it says we're winning this target, we're doing really well, but is that the reality on the ground? And so when we ask questions like that, that's where the accountability piece comes in. Is the reporting as accurate as it should be? What kind of reporting are they doing? How do they decide that we're doing well? Most of ours are yellow, oranges and reds. Red is where we are nowhere near achieving. So that is, our worst ones are responsible consumption and production, zero hunger, climate action, and partnership with the goals. We are a leader in the world and number one in Europe when it comes to textile waste. So per person a year, we waste 58 kilos of textile waste. So that's things like clothing, while the average in Europe is 26 kilos a year per person. So we're almost double the European average, which is not great. That is pretty bad. So it's something that we need to think about. And I suppose, what are the actions we need? So one that you've probably all heard about, hopefully, is phasing out fossil fuels. That's a really, really big part of what we need for sustainable development, because those resources that we're using, they're not sustainable. We can't keep using them because they'll run out. And they're also having a really big impact on our carbon emissions. Other things that we really need to improve are things like public transport. So moving away to a system that puts, I suppose, it makes it easier to travel. So our public transport system, not great in Ireland, so a lot of people don't use it and they rely on their own cars. So to reduce that, we need to invest in public transport. We need to waste less. And we need to, in terms of our land, we need to transform how we use our land. We need to give farmers the supports they need to switch to more sustainable methods of farming. So in Ireland, we are really reliant on agriculture. And that's a really important part of our history and our culture. Farmers are custodians of the land. They have a really important role to play. However, we're not necessarily supporting farmers as much as we could be in Ireland. And you'll hear a lot of talks in climate spaces about like farming is the problem and these people are the issue. But the reality is, in order to achieve the goals, we need something what's called a just transition. And that's where we leave no one behind. So we need to support people in what are considered unsustainable like ways of life so that they can come with us as we become more sustainable. And the reality is we need food and farming creates food. And we need to look at our lifestyles. So individual changes, and these are kind of more the short actions. So buying less, that's a really big, important thing. Trying to become, I suppose, more conscious of what you're reusing and reducing. And trying to make more sustainable choices when you're buying things. So maybe just very quickly with the person next to you, um, are there any things that you can think of that we can do to become more sustainable? Are there stuff that you believe that we should be doing, or things that maybe you are doing that you'd like to share in the chat? And I'll give you guys just like 2 minutes for that because we're coming up to wrapping up. So, for example, one of the things I've started doing recently is I moved house. And in my previous house, I had the tiniest freezer ever. Um, and it actually I didn't realize it, but I was wasting a lot of food because I was relying completely on stuff that would keep in the fridge for maybe a couple of days. Um, and I moved house and we have a huge freezer, like one of the ones you open and it's like a big chest. And it's been a game changer because now I can, if I, let's say, make a big bowl of pasta and I can't actually finish it, I can actually freeze it for the next day. Whereas before, I'd maybe put it in Tupperware in my fridge and forget about it. Um, so that's been really, really helpful is just freezing things. I found that really useful. Yeah, I'll give you a couple more seconds. Hopefully you guys are chatting about this.
I'll add on to yours about like just even food, just like food prepping throughout the week actually makes life a bit easier, and having like a menu for
Yeah.
when you're getting stuff, it's so much handier.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I found for a while I was really good at food prep, and this can be harder, especially if you're still living with your family, as I know a lot of students would be. Um, but even like making your lunch for school
Hmm.
a couple of days in advance, if you can pop things in the fridge or the freezer or things like that, um, I found it really does make a difference. And I don't know, I kind of like having it done for the week. Then I make my lunch and then I don't have to think about it too much.
Yeah, you feel accomplished.
Yeah, gives you
Yeah.
a sense of accomplishment. But because we're coming up on time, I'm just going to go on to the
Hmm.
next one there. So another way, I suppose, to take action is being loud and spreading awareness. And this doesn't necessarily mean like taking to the streets and protesting. That's good. Like, amplify your voice, amplify the voices of others. That's one way. But it doesn't just mean protest, it also means spreading awareness. So, talking to your friends, your family, asking questions, trying to make a decision for yourself and help other people understand um, the issues or things like that. One of the things that really helped me, I suppose, understand how to amplify my voice and my perspectives better was the understanding that we're discussing a lot of jargon, complicated words, terms, theory. But one of the things that you will always be an expert in is your own lived experience. And your own lived experience is so important and valuable to addressing these issues because you've lived these things that you see in your community, in your life, and no one else can tell you that you've experienced them another way because that is how you've grown up, that's how you've experienced things. And bringing your lived experience into these conversations is really important because the best way to convince anybody is through storytelling, because that's how we empathize with each other as humans. Um, so having those conversations and giving people the space and the time to ask questions and maybe be wrong and help them understand is really important because a lot of people don't have access to education and may never have the opportunity to learn about these things. So it's good for us to amplify and share this. And that leads into one of the most important things, which is working together and demanding change. So we've just gone through a number of elections. I know many people on the call possibly aren't able to vote yet. So it can feel a little frustrating. You're seeing these things happening, and how do you change them? How do you address them? The reality is, those politicians who have been voted in, they still represent you. Whether or not you were able to vote for them, you are still part of the community that they are working to support. So hold them accountable, and demand better. If you want them doing something, get onto them. And it can be hard as an individual, sometimes emailing and asking, why aren't you at this? Why aren't you doing this? I need you to do this. But maybe come together as a class or a group and write a collective letter or write loads of letters. Each person, if you have 10 people and they each write one letter or they each phone call the same person, that will make an impact. Um, and the same applies to not just governments, but also in businesses. So if you see a business doing something that you don't like, that you think is maybe bad for the environment, they are promoting unsustainable practices, um, hold them accountable, ask them, question them, challenge them. Um, that's one of the most important things in the sustainable development kind of piece and addressing climate change and addressing all these issues like homelessness, poverty, is there are people in power who have the resources to address them, but maybe they need a bit of pressure to address them. And I know that sometimes that's not fair. It should be it should just be done. But there's a real power in working together as a collective. So definitely use that. And then just for the last piece, This is just an image that we kind of use because I find it helpful to think of our actions. So you don't have to go all across the world on like a global level to think about these things and address these things. You can do it from your sofa, a sofa superstar. So if you look around the room, your chair, are there anything in your eye line, any things in your eye line that you see that you could do that might help? So, for example, I can see out of the corner of my eye, I have left my extension cable plugged in at the wall, but the switch is on. I'm not charging anything, but the switch is on. I should really probably turn that off. I have my light on. I don't think I actually need my light on. I think I put it on instinctively. So little things like that. And then we look at household hero. That's things that you could maybe do in your household. So maybe if a room is really, really cold, how can you insulate it better? And insulate is where you make things warmer. Maybe it needs a carpet. Maybe if you hang something on the wall, maybe thicker curtains, things like that. Maybe switching out light bulbs to be energy efficient ones, things like this. And then we have neighborhood nice guy. And that's thinking about things on a neighborhood level. So that could be getting involved in tidy towns, rewilding, beach cleanups, that kind of thing, where you're connecting with other people in your community. If you're in a school or a youth group, that is your community. Community doesn't have to be where you necessarily live. It's about the people you surround yourself with. And then exceptional employees. So I kind of think of this more of like the bigger environment. So not just in work, but also what can I do on like a wider level? So that could be, thinking about what is happening in terms of, let's say we're talking about writing letters or making your voice heard and things like this, but also in a work context, because I know a lot of students, I worked when I was working, well, when I was in school, um, you know, let's say you're working in retail and things like this. Are you being treated fairly? Are you getting a break at work? Things like that. Because that has an impact on the sustainable development side of things. So all these different things, we talk about equality, we talk about gender equality, which is a really important one. All these different things, they do intersect. And then just as we finish up, this is just something that the workshops team, we always kind of use as a reflection, is we are the first generation that can put an end to poverty and the last generation that can put an end to climate change. So that can feel a little bit like, oh, that's a lot. But I like to think of it as an opportunity and a motivation. Um, if we come together and we like work and we collaborate and we discuss and we share this information, we can actually change things. But we need to take action and we have to take action. And that can feel like a lot, but it's also an opportunity. We can actually do this. It's not completely lost. And that's really important, is that element of hope for the future, that we can actually do this. We can actually achieve these things. We just have to work a little bit at it. And everyone has a role, whether you're doing something small or something large in your home or in your community. Each of those different things does add up. That one conversation that you have with someone could have a massive ripple effect. And that's important to remember. Don't be too hard on yourself. Um, and just, I suppose if you have any questions, now is the time to pop them into the chat. Um, but just in terms of other things you can do to get involved. So we have the Young Environmentalist Awards. So let's say today you were chatting with each other or you've seen something and it's gone, I want to do something. Maybe you're not sure what, that's okay. But you want to take action. I'd really recommend, if that's the case, getting involved with the Young Environmentalist Awards. That's an all-island eco action program that rewards young people from the ages of 10 to 18 who take action around the environment. And that could be anything. It could be around the arts, it could be food, it could be just general research. it's so broad. You can literally fit anything into it if you think like smartly about it. Then there's workshops. Let's say you want to do a workshop in your school, get on to us. You can get on to me. And we can come down and do things on like waste or fast fashion, marine life, um, kind of anything under the sun that relates to sustainable development and climate. We can probably figure something out. And then youth groups. So we have things like the Youth Climate Justice group. We have Youth for Sustainable Development. These are kind of more after school activities that allow you to dive a little deeper into these topics like climate justice. What is that? If you're interested, maybe you should get involved. So they're just some of the different options that we have. And then Antonia has popped into the chat there a feedback form, and I believe you'll be sent this via Eventbrite as well. So Eco Week happens every year. It's a really important part of the work that we do to share this knowledge. But one of the things that we try to do always is when we're delivering these workshops, they're informed by young people. So if you have feedback, ideas, maybe I didn't talk about something that you were hoping I would talk about, let us know. Because that's how we make things better. So if you have any ideas, criticisms, compliments, anything, you can pop them in, and they'll be taken on board, and they're really, really important for the work that we do. So please do that. And then maybe you're going to some other bits. So this was the last session for today, but there's ones on climate change tomorrow. There's Wild About Nature, energy, gender. There's loads of different stuff going on this week. So definitely check it out if you're interested. And yeah, thank you. If you want more information, you know where to find us. And yeah, oh, that's really nice, that message in the chat. Thank you very much. And with that, because we've gone a little over time, I will let you go. And thank you so much. Hopefully this was useful.
Yeah, thank you everyone. If you have any like questions, anything, just pop an email to our info@eco-unesco.ie and then it gets sent to whichever program or department you'll need to talk to. But hope you all had a great day, and hopefully we will see you for the rest of the week. So follow all our social media. We have everything up there. So if you want to find out any more about the information or the sessions, just follow social media. All right, guys, have a great week. Thanks, Maya.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.